Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Razan Pereira. Prime Minister Narendra Modi laid the foundation stone in New Delhi for the city gas distribution projects across 129 districts, which won under the 9th CGD bidding round held recently. At each of the geographical areas across 19 states in India, the authorized entities also held their event locally. The projects recently awarded by the Petroleum and Natural Gas Regulatory Board would cover 65 GAs to bring gas to around half of the country's population in 26 states and union territories. As part of a larger plan to shift towards an environment-friendlier gas-based economy, the development of CGD networks will increase the availability of clean cooking fuel or piped natural gas and transportation fuel compressed natural gas for consumers. The project has covered 96 cities and districts covering 46.5 lakh households and 32 lakh CNG vehicles so far. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the city gas distribution projects. Joining me on the program today are A.K. Bhattacharya, Editorial Director of the Business Standard, Anil Razdan, former Special Secretary, Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas and former Power Secretary as well, Ajay Shankar, former Secretary, Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion, and R.S. Sharma, former Chairman, ONGC. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Mr. Razdan, I'd like to begin with you first. Let's try and put into perspective and also try and understand what you make about the city gas distribution projects.
I think the city gas distribution project is a very timely exercise. In fact, it should have come a little earlier, because the present mode of delivering gas to consumers with cylinders is a highly energy intensive exercise. And you bring in a retailer, there's transportation, there's a bit of harassment for the consumer. He also doesn't know when his cylinder is going to end, and then he has the anxiety of booking the next one. Whereas piped gas, you're bringing gas to him directly. There is assurance of a continued supply. It's more efficient. It would be more cost efficient also. It is good that the gas network is being laid, but it all depends at the other end to pay for the pipeline costs, whether you've got consumers at the other end who are going to pay for all that infrastructure. So the two have to go hand in hand, and I think the government is doing well by fixing the city gas distribution network and simultaneously extending the pipeline infrastructure. But the limits of this outreach will depend on our limits also to be able to import those quantities of gas in terms of availability of foreign exchange in times to come. So maybe when we are getting 100% electrified now, virtually every home, and if power comes at a reasonable cost, and in the future if renewable energy, that is solar and other, is also able to provide some loads, and on the energy efficiency side, we are able to make more efficient cook stoves, this will certainly even up things. And in the long run, to some consumers, gas could be a bridge fuel before they move on to electricity for clean cooking at home.
Right. Mr. Shankar, at the end of the day, what is the aim of these projects really, and what is the aim of having a national gas grid?
There are two short-term or immediate implications. One is that the extent to which in the urban areas consumers can get gas through pipelines, then those gas cylinders get released for the program of taking clean cooking fuel and gas to the rural areas. So I think this fits in well with the program and the ambition of trying to get clean cooking fuel to all households, because then those households in the cities which are using cylinders can release those cylinders for use in the rural areas. The other more important implication in terms of air pollution is that if we do have a gas grid covering our entire urban areas, then a whole range of industrial activities which today use dirty fuels and pollute the air can switch over to the use of gas for industrial activity. Because there are a whole range of industrial activities which take place in our urban areas, some in authorized industrial clusters, some in unauthorized areas, but all of them need energy and use energy which pollutes the air by burning coal and other fuels. So if the gas grid can replace the other fuels which are being used for industrial purposes, it would make a dramatic difference to the crisis of air pollution which we have in the country today. So in that sense, this is a very timely initiative, and it is not probably being seen by many as something which would also help in controlling air pollution.
Right.
But as the rollout takes place, it is very important to see that the consumers who want it for industrial and other commercial purposes get it very easily, and the pricing issue is handled in such a way that it does not create distortions or rationing issues. It should
Absolutely.
be readily available, freely available at the same price for all consumers, no matter how much quantity they consume.
Absolutely. Mr. Bhattacharya, how will this distribution system be different from the existing distribution system?
Well, it will be far more efficient for one, because this is a pipe delivery to your households. And let me give you one set of figure. It will also be efficient because currently the PNG, pipe natural gas, is 40% cheaper than the unsubsidized price of LPG. So to that extent, it will be more efficient. Second, if you are looking at a network of CNG run vehicles, you will see cost efficiency of, if it is a petrol run vehicle, you have a cost efficiency of almost 60%, and if it is diesel, it is 45%. So the cost advantages are for anyone to see. And finally, you are giving consumer the choice. Now we know that BS6 fuel is already in the market, and the polluting effect of BS6 is almost the same as the CNGs. So somebody might argue that, listen, why are you going for CNG when you already have BS6 fuel? But then in a market where you need to fight on pollution on all fronts, you are giving choice to the consumer that, listen, if you don't have the BS6 fuel in some markets, there is CNG for you. Similarly, in the case of the LPG and PNG, the choices are there, and as Mr. Shankar rightly pointed out, it actually allows the government to roll out the Ujjwala scheme far more effectively, because there are numbers of cylinders that will be vacated in areas where you get the PNG network. So therefore, it is going to be efficient from cost perspective. It will be efficient in terms of reach. The only question which we can discuss later is the achievability of the targets, because it is an infrastructure dependent service.
We will come to that. But also, Mr. Bhattacharya, before we move on, what happens to those who are getting subsidized LPG cylinders, and what if this pipeline reaches them?
They don't lose out. They just switch over to a more efficient, because by its very nature, gas produces less carbon dioxide. So it's a much more easier and on the environment, and therefore a person who is getting subsidized cylinders will be able to get continuous supply of a more environment friendly cooking fuel at a price which is the same as is subsidized gas.
Gas, all right. Mr. Sharma, your thoughts really on why we need a gas grid?
Well, why not? In fact, I have heard all the three co-panelists. They have, I feel, in a very comprehensive and detailed manner described the need for it, why it is needed. So it is very much needed. But issue is, I am just coming straight from Vigyan Bhavan. I heard the Honorable Prime Minister laying the foundation stones for all that 9th round and launching 10th round. It all sounds very much music in the ears. But the challenge is, last Mr. Bhattacharya briefly mentioned, challenge is laying the infrastructure. Infrastructure for laying the pipelines, infrastructures for setting up CNG stations. We see in Delhi itself, the vehicles, those who are on CNG get queued up throughout the night and to getting their fills. Thing is, unless we create an infrastructure, and I feel it will not happen, it has to be the infrastructure development has to be the responsibility of the state. PPP model, we have seen the biggest failure, ILFS. So it has to be responsibility has to be taken up by the government, like Ujjwala scheme. It is a success. Why? Because the government has taken the responsibility. In CGD also, the project is very ambitious. It is very much doable. It does require a lot of gas. Questions come where from all that gas will come. But in comparative terms, compared to this fertilizer, power plants, it does not need huge volumes of gas. So the effort have to be to firstly make available that gas at affordable prices. I have been very consistent in saying, and yesterday also I was on some channel, I said, the domestic produced gas, why doesn't it get import parity? We are happily importing LNG. Domestic produced gas gets 1/3 price of that imported LNG. Domestic produced oil gets the same import parity. We want to promote gas. Why not give the same that import price here? And today the PTI stories all over the papers that ONGC Oil India, they can increase their gas production at least by half of their current production, provided they get the remunerative price. I have been saying that, and I was fortunate during my time, Mr. Razdan used to be additional secretary. I got tremendous support. I did get for some new gas discoveries, the gas market-based price. We were able to make investment, produce it. But somehow that regime, that conducive environment seems to be missing. I have been hearing these stories from the minister, prime minister, but we have to see whether it is doable. And there has to be very clear roadmap, commitment that how it will be done.
Absolutely.
Unless that how is addressed, so all this will remain a pipe dream.
Okay. It's all very good on paper is what Mr. Sharma is suggesting. Mr. Razdan, how do we ensure that the timelines are met, and how do we ensure that the project is implemented the way it's supposed to be? Because over the past we've seen that implementation is a major problem as far as we are concerned.
You see, the major issue here, I feel, is going to be right-of-way issues. Now, I think in Kerala they had a problem some time back when Petronet had their LNG terminal getting pipelines out of their port into distribution areas. Yes, from Kochi. So they need, you see, we need to be very clear that all these projects, whether it is gas transmission or it is power transmission, you need right of way. Luckily for gas, you see, it's underground, so it is not that disturbing. But I think the law in respect of pipelines is quite unfair. The amount of compensation which the person over whose land you're laying down the pipelines is very minimal. And he does not, he can only do agriculture on that land. He cannot build on that structure at all over that entire corridor, which is of reasonable width. And the quantum of compensation as opposed to the price of land is minimal. I think government will have to see wherever there are such flaws in the law, they need to revisit that so that right of way becomes an issue which is surmountable. Secondly, I think the regulatory authority at the moment, the PNGRB is farming out these projects. We'll have to see when there's a huge extensive network, whether what will be the outreach in the states, because unlike power, which is a concurrent subject, petroleum is a central subject. So the central outreach will have to reach out to all the states and down to the very rural areas through which it is passing. The other issue is, I think we have to be very clear about safety issues also. The education of the consumers, and also I think the distribution companies have to have good outreach to explain to people how we can avoid some accidents like has been happening in the case of cylinders,
Right.
which are of course more dangerous. But yes, city gas pipeline distribution network also has to have some safeguards. So this consumer education also, which has to go hand in hand with this. Beyond this, I don't see very much of a problem, because I think over the years a lot of ports have started building terminals also to receive gas. So that may not be so much of a problem. But as far as the question of remunerative and non-discriminatory prices mentioned by Mr. Sharma, I think it's a well-merited argument, because after all, if the ultimate landed price of a commodity is there, you have to probably give a fair compensation to whoever is discovering the commodity.
Right.
There is an argument that sometimes the commodities, say like oil and gas, in very oil and gas rich countries, the domestic price is much lower than what an international price is.
Right.
So this will have to be seen, whether we are in that position to be lifting that kind of a burden and that discriminatory burden.
Absolutely. Mr. Shankar, the model for the gas grid, of course, is a PPP model. Is that the best way forward, really?
It is the right way forward, but the government would need to take leadership in seeing that the full value chain moves in a harmonized and synchronized fashion. So if you have certain retail demand in the cities as the city grid gets set up, we need to see that there are enough LNG terminals and the pipelines from the LNG terminals which bring gas from the coast to all the consuming centers. Now, all these are lumpy investments, and the government will need to take leadership to ensure that the investments take place in a synchronized manner. So it shouldn't happen that a city has a gas grid, but the pipeline to carry the gas is not there, or the pipeline to carry the gas is there, but the LNG terminal is not ready. I would also like to add that I am not optimistic of domestic gas finds increasing rapidly enough to meet the demand that would emerge through what is being attempted. So I think we need to focus on LNG terminals and imports from overseas. And fortunately, there is a sufficient availability of gas, and that too at reasonable prices in the international market. So I think if the government takes leadership properly and synchronizes the investments and takes care of the risk mitigation of those who are going to make the investments, I think we should be able to see very good results in a few years.
Right. Mr. Bhattacharya, talking about the economic aspect of it, these projects are definitely not going to be cheap. Where is the funding going to come from?
Well, as you said, this is going to be a PPP model thing, but
But then there's going to be a bidding process. We've seen what has happened with the bidding
Absolutely.
processes in the past as well. We don't really have
I
a great...
think you have given it to a regulator, and the regulator should ensure that things happen in good time. So I'm not too worried about that. What I'm worried about are the dangers of sequential planning. And the dangers of sequential planning is that you may create the pipeline, but you may not have the facility and the capacity for regasification of imported LNG. Now, right now, I think there is a mismatch there. We have got around 17,000 kilometers of pipeline. Another 14,000 kilometers of pipeline is under construction, we understand. Now, capacity to regasify LNG is something that needs to be focused on. So we need to work on the infrastructure front, and concurrently. So there is no time for sequential planning that we do the pipelines now and then you go in for the terminals and then go in for the regasification facility. But we need, if you have a vision that 70% of the country's people should have access to PNG and CNG, then I think time now is to do concurrent planning on all the infrastructure outlets that will have to meet this demand. So therefore, and also there is an added challenge coming, because it should not give rise to a situation that it did about a few years ago, that when the country was reported to be floating on gas and every industrial unit was trying to set up a enterprise based on gas, and then suddenly the policy shift happened and no, the city gas will get the priority. So the projects that were set up or were under construction or had been constructed were suddenly deprived of the gas supplies. So I think we need not be get carried away by this situation. It is important that if city gas is the priority area, then make sure that the infrastructure projects are implemented concurrently, and the prioritization of city gas as a policy, if it is a priority area, then it should be stuck to, and the other, various fertilizer, power and other projects, they should be told clearly, listen, this gas is not meant for you, please go ahead and find an alternative situation. So I think we need a proper allocation of gas also, so that there are no uncertainties involved. It is a great benefit to have almost 50,000 crore investment is likely to come because of this.
Right.
So if 50,000 crore investment is coming, is good news for the economy, but at the same time, it should not have a destructive effect for the other sectors as well.
Absolutely.
So we need to look at it in a comprehensive and a cohesive way.
Absolutely. Mr. Sharma, are the people really ready to make this kind of a switch at the end of the day from your traditional tried and tested methods to this new method?
Yes, people are very much the willing. They will be very much receptive. Issue is the availability. And just one comment on what Mr. Shankar said, there's limited potential for the domestic gas production to go up. I have been chairman ONGC on the board for 9 years. I can vouch for it. There is even from the existing fields, onshore, offshore fields, some of there lot of small discoveries are there which are not today remunerative to produce. If it is given that they will be able to, even these discoveries long time made, if they start producing, that will be getting the market base price equivalent to LNG imported price. So today is the PTI story. 100% I support that story. The domestic production can go up and people will be very happy, very receptive. The issue is the delivery of the infrastructure. Who makes that investment for the infrastructure? Now the gas pipeline that in the east, I'm not remembering the pipeline, which is being done on the subsidy to come from the government. What is that model? I'm missing out that. So thing is, unless that sort of commitment is coming from the government, it will come up. Where from all that funds will come, that is to be seen, how they will be provided.
Right.
PPP model, I'm afraid it will have limited potential. There are a lot of investments were made by the power producer based on the gas to be made available. Those are idling. They are not viable on imported LNG. So
Right.
the issue is the availability at the affordable prices.
Affordability
Pricing.
at the end of the day, affordable prices is what we are looking for.
Plenty of LNG available globally. You can
Right.
keep buying. Currently it is cheap. I have seen that same LNG getting sold at $16, $17, $18 this MMBTU also.
Right.
So issue is the vulnerability part of it, how the stability will maintain. It shouldn't happen the same petroleum product pricing.
Yeah.
What we have seen 2-3 months back. That sort of chaos should not happen.
Absolutely.
So it has to be long-term thinking, long-term vision, and considered, evaluated view to be taken for this implementation.
Absolutely. Okay, closing comments now from all my guests, starting first with you, Mr. Razdan. You raised the issue of ensuring the, continuous supply of gas at the end of the day, uninterrupted service. How can we ensure that?
Uninterrupted service, you see, is also linked to affordability. Is a point that was mentioned a little while back. My opening remarks were also subject to a qualification that I had said that in the ultimate analysis, will you be able to afford that much gas? That's why I said that I'm looking at gas probably as a bridge fuel, because the International Energy Agency also in its review now says the future is electric.
Right.
But it is a way to a clean cooking fuel, which is for health-wise, for environment-wise, it is the right thing to do. But I think the trunk lines will have to come before the distribution spurs come, because the distribution spurs will be built over a period of time, but the trunk line investment has to be done, I think, essentially by the government.
Right.
And so the trunk feeder lines are there, and in the future the spurs can take off.
Sure.
Subsequently. And I think the question of fixing the infrastructure, as you know, the country is going heavily for urbanization today.
Right.
In the times to come, I think the pockets of distribution are also going to be largely concentrated, which will, I think, ease the business of laying the distribution pipelines for pipe gas supply.
Absolutely. Mr. Shankar, your closing remarks.
I think the government has a major responsibility of ensuring coordinated and timely implementation of projects and for the entire value chain. So that is securing reasonable long-term contracts for LNG, the LNG terminals, the pipelines to carry the gas to the cities, and within the city addressing issues of right-of-way and seeing that every consumer, both domestic, commercial and industrial, is able to get gas as easily as he's able to get petrol or diesel today.
Right.
And that is a huge challenge of coordination, because at each level there will be issues of project clearances and also of risk mitigation in PPP projects and commercial viability. So it will be a fairly difficult challenge, but worth attempting, and I'm sure and optimistic that we should be able to get there quickly enough.
Absolutely. You know, Mr. Bhattacharya, we've spoken about several benefits as far as the gas grid is concerned. Another benefit, of course, is what it will do to the environment.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the environment will benefit. Environment will benefit because the overall the emission levels should come down if a larger number of people are using PNG for cooking fuel as well as for CNG for this thing. But I'm also looking at the manner in which more automobile companies will probably get encouraged to produce more CNG kit-fitted, factory-fitted cars. Right now, it is not happening.
Yeah.
So therefore, it is at the cottage industry level where you go buy a car and you get the CNG kit fitted. Now, if this pipeline network is in place, then the automobile industry probably will be encouraged to produce cars and other passenger vehicles with a CNG factory-fitted vehicle. So therefore, it is very important that the pipeline network and the availability of CNG is available as easily as I think was being envisaged, because you know, as Mr. Sharma was pointing out, that in Delhi you see long queues.
Yeah,
now, if
so
Delhi
that
you
has
see
to be
long
addressed,
queues,
yeah.
that has to be addressed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mr. I'm coming to you, Mr. Razan. I'm out of time. I've got very limited time on the program. Mr. Sharma, your closing comments on the program.
Yeah, I missed that term, VGF, viability gap funding. For the infrastructure financing, viability gap funding has to come from the government. And then, you know, that LNG terminals, they will come at their own. But for laying the trunk lines, spur lines, making that availability. So that funding, how it will come, that issue has to be addressed. But it is a very much desirable to make a gas-based economy, and it should be implemented, should be done. It should not remain a pipe dream. The parties bidding, it should not happen like this, you know, solar mission.
Absolutely.
The bidding happened, now they are not viable.
Out of time on the program. I'd like to thank all my guests for joining me on The Big Picture and putting things into perspective for us. That's it on this edition of The Big Picture. See you again next time.